Hey guys, what's going on? Laying back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Carter. Carter is a South Korean action movie that tells the story of Carter, a man who wakes up in a strange building with no idea of who he is or any memories that would give him a clue. He's assisted by a mysterious voice who tells him of his name, as well as the mission that he's required to fulfill. Carter learns that a pandemic that originated from the Korean DMZ is ravaging across the USA and North Korea, and that he must rescue and escort a little girl to safety whose antibodies are the key to curing the virus. As he goes about his mission and trying to overcome his amnesia, Carter realizes that there are more stakes at play than he's led to believe. It's always great to see an Asian action movie, as they tend to be more experimental compared to American ones, and this one definitely fits the bill as far as being experimental goes, but it doesn't always work. The action scenes and story vary between being engaging and incoherent, so it ultimately ends up being a mixed bag. Carter is a compelling protagonist in that he clearly has a dark past of some sort behind him, with how he wakes up being an instrument of death despite not knowing who he is. He exudes an air of mystery where one isn't really sure of what his true backstory is, which was good at drawing me in to see how he would regain his memory. As he goes about the story, he's able to pick up bits and pieces of who he once was, with help from the voice in his head, evidence he comes across in his mission, and conversations he has or overhears. There's almost as much variety story-wise as there is with the action, which was good to see. This being said, Carter's goals and background didn't always make sense. Between his associations with North Korea, South Korea, and the USA, there's a lot of variables at play that make it really hard to understand what exactly he's going through. To begin with, the core concept of the movie does make sense. Carter has to escort a girl to safety named Hana, the daughter of Dr. Jung, who is able to cure the virus. But there are multiple parties at play who want to capture the girl as political leverage, and this was a good way at building suspense. Once Carter starts interacting with enough people, things start to go off the rails story-wise. There's a lot of exposition surrounding the pandemic in the movie, as well as all the narrative threads surrounding Carter's amnesia, and the longer it goes on, the bigger a mess it becomes. Now, on one hand, the number of factions chasing after Carter, like the North Koreans, South Korea's NIS, and the American CIA, was good to see. It shows how big of a scale the pandemic really is, and as I said, it raises the stakes of the story as they all pursue the same thing, which is Hana. But on the other hand, it gets really confusing when twist after twist is revealed, showing all the parties that are cooperating with or backstabbing each other, only for these alliances and betrayals to suddenly be forgotten about later on. The CIA in particular only feels like it's there just to give the movie more global appeal. Most of the American characters in general were either awkward or cartoonish in their execution, and sometimes both. There's one weird scene where an American reporter interrupts a tense exchange between opposing forces, and I couldn't help but laugh at how jarring it was to see a reporter yelling at soldiers in uniform. The way Carter is never 100% sure of the truth does make sense, as he's assaulted by so much information that he always finds himself questioning everything he does. But there came a point where it was all too much for myself to process. Carter learns that he has a daughter who is infected with the virus, and he has to rescue her along with Hana. This would have been good at adding a time limit of sorts to his mission, which would have raised the tension, but the movie doesn't really take advantage of this. She almost feels like an afterthought who was thrown in just to manufacture an emotional attachment to Carter. It seems like the movie tries to bite off more than it can chew with how much backstory is thrown Carter's way, with some of it not even having that much importance to the story in the long run, especially with the whole CIA stint he had. Things do make a bit more sense in the final act, but a little less exposition would have gone a long way. It's pretty obvious though that the main focus isn't on story, but on action, and the movie does a much better job in this regard. There are so many different kinds of action scenes put into this movie, which adds variety, and virtually all of them are a total bloodbath. The first scene in the movie is without a doubt the most memorable for me. Carter ends up in a bathhouse where some mafiosos are torturing a hostage, and he ends up cutting down the whole mafia in that room. The stunt choreography in that scene is fantastic, and the sheer amount of carnage and blood turning all the water red within seconds is an image I'll never forget. Plenty of brawls and gunfights are featured as well for good measure, which are all entertaining, largely thanks to the variety of settings where they take place. From planes to trains, and from roofs to highways, it seems no one is safe from the violence in this movie. But the action doesn't just stop at guns and fists. The movie has a small handful of chase sequences too, both on foot and in vehicles. The way the tension builds up leading to all these sequences is palpable, and when it gets right down to it, nothing beats seeing cars crash and explode into pieces. Despite the intensity of these scenes, the movie also knows when to take a break from the craziness. Carter spends time bonding with Hana, which is nice to see, and the stealth sequences where he drops enemies in one bullet and searches for clues are pretty fun as well. It quickly becomes evident that the filmmakers had a lot of fun showing off its creative cinematography both in and outside of the action, sometimes a bit too much fun. Most of the time it's fine during during the non-action scenes and actually adds to the story, with how the wide shots show Carter and other characters trying to outwit each other. When it comes to the action though, things can get a bit iffy. There are numerous switches in camera perspectives in the middle of a fight or shootout, and while it is nice to see multiple views of the same scene and not just constant shaky cam close-ups, the transitions occur so often that they end up distracting from the action. Honestly, the transitions wouldn't have been as big of an issue if it weren't clearly going for a specific visual style. The whole movie is made out to be filmed in one long take, which is impressive to see pulled off, but when it comes to the action, it's not always needed, and sometimes it just doesn't work. No matter how many tricks the camera tries to pull off with the scenery, it's almost always obvious whenever a cut is made in the film itself. The more bombastic action scenes with vehicles and explosions also tended to have muddier textures due to bad CGI, and combined with the way the camera pans and flows in its long takes, these scenes can get pretty ugly. Some of the action set pieces can be pretty ridiculous at times, especially when Carter starts ricocheting off multiple objects in a row, often with Hana in tow, escaping falls that would otherwise kill them, and yet I don't mind them all that much. If anything, I found his complete disregard for physics made the action that much more fun. The movie ends on a cliffhanger that concludes on an ambiguous note and is clearly meant to set up a future sequel. I wasn't a fan of how the movie approached this, though it has more to do with the complete lack of falling action, which gives no time to process the aftermath of the struggles Carter went through. This falling action seems to take place before the climax, in which a ton of info is dumped on Carter when he regains his memory. It is good to have some details behind his past finally being revealed, but in the end I still had more questions than answers, and it appears we'll have to wait for a sequel to get those answers. Overall, Carter is an intriguing action flick that hits and misses with both its story and action in equal parts, and turns out average as a result. If you like action movies with a variety of set pieces, and you don't mind stories that don't always make sense, I think you might enjoy this movie. Its visual style, action scenes, and story presentation are a bit of a mess, but it's an entertaining mess that I think is still worth checking out. I'd rather a movie try something different than blend in with the crowd, and this movie is certainly unique. What did you think about this movie? Were you blown away by the variety of the action scenes, or did you find the story to not make any sense? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Carter. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Taiwanese drama, Reclaim. Bye bye!